I don't believe in signs. I don't believe in fate, curses, or messages from the dead. I believe in cables, circuits, software bugs, and human error. That's why it took me far too long to realize that what happened that night wasn't a malfunction. I worked the overnight shift at a small local radio station. Not a popular one. Not the kind people brag about listening to. The kind that plays quietly in the background while someone drives alone, stocks shelves, or waits for sleep to come. My shift ran from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. Everyone called it the dead shift. No live guests, no ad blocks, no call-ins. Just music automation, hourly pre-recorded news, and me, alone in a soundproof room that always felt colder after midnight. At exactly 1:55 a.m., I did what I always did. I stood up, stretched, walked to the coffee machine down the hall, poured myself something strong enough to taste bitter even through exhaustion, and went back into the control room. Everything looked normal. Playlist running, signal levels steady, news segment queued for the top of the hour. At 2 a.m., the system automatically faded the music out and rolled the hourly news bulletin. The anchor's voice came through the monitors, clear, calm, familiar. "Good morning. This is your hourly update." I barely listened. I never did. The news at night was always the same recycled content. Traffic updates no one needed. Weather forecasts for a morning I wouldn't see. I leaned back in my chair and checked my phone. Then I heard something that made me look up. Authorities are responding to reports of a fatal collision on... I frowned. The anchor paused. That didn't happen. There was a half-second of silence, not the clean kind, the wrong kind, like a breath being held. Then the voice continued, but slower. A single vehicle accident involving a gray sedan, the driver identified as... My stomach tightened. That wasn't in the script. I spun my chair toward the screen showing the news playback file. The file name hadn't changed. The timestamp was correct. But the waveform on the screen didn't match what I was hearing. The anchor said a name. My name. The victim was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities report no signs of foul play. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and slammed into the wall. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the monitors. This had to be a prank, a corrupted file, some weird audio bleed. I reached for the mute button. Before I could press it, the anchor added one last sentence. If you are listening to this broadcast, please do not try to intervene. Then the audio cut to static. Not clean white noise. Thick. Warped. Crawling. The signal meter spiked, then dropped to 0. The room went silent. I stood there, hands shaking inches above the console, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just heard my own death announced on live radio. After a few seconds, the system reset itself. Music resumed like nothing had happened. No error logs, no alerts, no missing files. I checked the recorded news bulletin. It was normal. No accident, no name, no warning. I laughed, a nervous, ugly laugh. I told myself it was exhaustion, my brain filling in gaps, a momentary hallucination. I sat back down. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. A news alert. Breaking, single vehicle collision reported, 1 fatality confirmed. I dropped my phone. And from somewhere deep inside the station's walls, I heard the faint sound of static returning. I didn't go home after that alert. I should have. Any sane person would have grabbed their jacket, shut the station down, and driven straight into the sunrise like nothing happened. Instead, I stayed. Part of me needed to prove it was coincidence. Another part, the louder one, needed to hear it again. I refreshed every local news site I could think of. The details matched. Single vehicle accident, gray sedan, 1 fatality. But the name wasn't released. Yet, I checked the station logs. No incoming calls, no remote connections, no unauthorized access. The news bulletin that had played at 2 a.m. was still the same clean, harmless file it had always been. And yet, it hadn't been. At 2:59 a.m., I hovered my finger over the volume slider. The system automatically cued the next hourly bulletin. I told myself I'd mute it if anything sounded off. I didn't mute it. "Good morning, this is your hourly update." Same voice, same calm tone. I stared at the waveform, watching it scroll across the screen. "Authorities have released additional details regarding the fatal collision earlier tonight." My breath caught. The waveform changed. Not drastically, just enough to be wrong. The vehicle was found abandoned at the scene. Witnesses report seeing the driver exit the car before emergency services arrived. That wasn't possible. I was sitting right there. Police are asking anyone with information to come forward. The individual was last seen wearing... The anchor paused again. That same unnatural silence. "A black jacket. If you recognize this description, do not approach." My reflection stared back at me from the dark monitor. I was wearing a black jacket. "The individual is considered extremely dangerous." I slammed the mute button. The audio cut, but the waveform kept moving. My heart hammered in my ears as I leaned closer to the screen. The anchor's mouth was still moving in the studio feed, but no sound came through. Then, slowly, the volume meter began to rise on its own. A new audio channel opened, one that wasn't routed through the board. Static poured into the room, low, rhythmic, almost breathing, and beneath it, another voice. Not the anchor, not pre-recorded. "Don't turn it off." I froze. The voice sounded close. Too close. Like it wasn't coming from the speakers. Like it was inside the room. "If you stop listening," it said, "you won't hear the corrections." My hands shook as I reached for the main power switch. The voice laughed, a dry, broken sound. "It already knows you heard it." The monitors flickered. For a split second, the playlist screen was replaced by a block of text. "Next update, 3 a.m. Status, revision in progress." Then everything snapped back to normal. Silence. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. At 3:07 a.m., the station phone rang. I stared at it. We didn't get calls overnight. The line wasn't even advertised. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I picked up. "Hello?" There was no breathing on the other end, no background noise, just a voice, filtered, distorted, like it was coming through an old radio buried underground. "You weren't supposed to hear the first version." My mouth went dry. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "We don't use names anymore." The line clicked. The call log showed nothing. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another alert. "Update. Authorities now searching for suspect connected to earlier crash." I slowly looked up at the clock on the wall. 2:59, 3:03:12. The radio hadn't been predicting the news. It had been editing it. And whatever was behind those broadcasts had just realized I was still alive. By 3:20 a.m., I had locked every door in the station. It didn't make me feel safer. It just made the silence louder. The phone stayed quiet after that call, but the static never fully left. It sat beneath everything, like a low-frequency hum you only notice when you stop moving. I tried to distract myself with work. I opened the station's archive system. Not the music library, the old archive. The one no one touched, unless something broke badly enough to justify digging through history. The system warned me before loading. Archived content, legacy format, some files may be corrupted that felt generous. Most of the recordings dated back decades. Old talk shows, long-forgotten interviews, emergency broadcasts from storms no one remembered anymore. Then I saw a folder that didn't have a date, just a label. Corrections. I stared at it for a full minute before clicking. Inside were audio files, dozens of them, all named the same way. Update 01. Update 02, Update 03. No timestamps, no metadata, no creator. I selected the first one. The waveform loaded instantly, too instantly. I pressed play, static. Then a voice, not the anchor's, not the one I'd heard earlier. This one was deeper, slower. As if it had learned to speak by listening to humans but never quite mastered it. "This is a correction," the voice said. The previous version was inaccurate. I stopped the file. My hands were sweating. I checked the next one. "This is a correction. The subject survived longer than expected." The next. "This is a correction. Witnesses were not meant to see that." My chest felt tight now. These weren't broadcasts. They were revisions. I scrolled. The last file in the folder wasn't numbered. It had a name. My name. I didn't click it. Instead, I pulled up the transmission logs from earlier that night. At 2 a.m., the system showed a second outgoing signal, one that wasn't routed through the antenna. At 3 a.m., there were 2. At 3:12 a.m., there were 3. Whatever was speaking wasn't broadcasting to listeners. It was broadcasting through the station. At 3:41 a.m., the static surged again. The monitors dimmed. Then the studio mic, untouched, unmoved, turned itself on. I watched the red light glow. I didn't touch it. I didn't breathe. The station speakers crackled. "Say the name," the voice said. I shook my head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Silence. Then the waveform began to draw itself on the screen. Letters forming slowly, not typed, drawn. "You heard it." "I heard a glitch," I said. My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. The mic light pulsed. "There was a version," the voice replied, "before the correction." I swallowed. "There are always versions." The static deepened. "Some names anchor events," it said. "They stabilize outcomes. Remove the name and the story can change." I understood then. The broadcast at 2 a.m. hadn't been meant for the public. It had been meant for me. "You said my name?" I whispered. "Yes." "Why?" A pause, then. "Because the first version ended too early." The monitors flickered again. For a split second, I saw footage that wasn't from the station. A dark road, flashing lights. A body lying twisted beside a gray sedan. My body. Then it changed. Another version. The car empty. The road quiet. Someone walking away into the trees. Me again. "You corrected it," I said. "We allowed it to be corrected." The mic light flared brighter. "Say the name on air," the voice repeated. "Confirm the anchor." "No," I said. "You don't get to use me." The static screamed. The speakers rattled. "Refusal noted," the voice said calmly. "Alternate resolution required." The archive folder opened on its own. The file with my name highlighted itself. The play button depressed. I lunged for the console, but the audio was already flooding the room. "This is a correction," the voice said, using my voice, my exact voice. "The subject believes refusal will prevent the outcome." I screamed for it to stop. It didn't. "The subject will attempt to leave the station at..." The audio cut. The system clock flickered. 3:59 a.m. The top of the hour bulletin cued itself. Automatically. I stared at the studio mic, at the red light, at the empty room reflected in the glass, and I realized something far worse than any prediction. At 4 a.m., the station wouldn't need a pre-recorded voice anymore. It already had mine. The clock hit 4 a.m. exactly. The news bulletin didn't start. No intro music, no anchor voice, just static, thick, layered, deliberate. Then the studio phone rang. I stared at it, frozen. The red mic light was still on. I hadn't touched it. The phone rang again. I picked it up with shaking hands. "Radio station," I said, forcing the words out. A man spoke immediately, breathing fast, panicked. "You're doing it again." "I don't know who you are," I said. "You aired it already," he replied. "You said my name." My stomach dropped. "What's your name?" There was a pause, a sharp inhale. "Don't make me say it," he whispered. "That's how it locks." The line crackled. "I was driving home," he continued. The radio cut out. "Then you came on. You said there'd been a stabbing at a gas station en route." He stopped. "I've never told anyone where I live." Cold crept up my spine. "I'm not broadcasting," I said. "You need to turn your radio off." "I tried," he said. "It follows." Behind his voice I heard something else, static, but not from my end, from his. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "At the gas station," he said. The sound of a door opening, a bell chiming. "You said it would happen at 4:11. The clock on my wall read 4:09. "Please," he said, "tell me it's wrong." I looked at the console. A new text field had appeared on the monitor. Not part of any software, I knew. Just plain white letters on black. "Update pending subject. Unnamed caller, no," I said aloud. "I'm not doing this." The letters changed. "Correction required," the man on the line gasped. "It's back," he whispered. "The static. It's louder now." A muffled voice echoed in the background. Another person, a stranger. The bell chimed again. I slammed the phone down. The studio phone rang immediately, then again. Then every line lit up at once. I backed away from the desk as the room filled with ringing. The monitors turned on by themselves. Each screen showed a waveform, different shapes, different rhythms, different voices. I picked up another line, and a woman this time, crying. "You said my daughter drowned," she sobbed. "She's standing right in front of me." Another call cut in. "I heard myself scream before it happened." Another. "You told them not to look for me." Another. "You said I wouldn't feel it." The voices overlapped, stacking, bleeding into one another. I dropped the phone. The ringing stopped. The static didn't. The speakers came alive. "Listeners are adapting," the voice said calmly. "Unexpected variable." I screamed into the room, "Stop calling them." A pause. Then, "They called you." The screens changed again. One by one, the waveforms aligned, synchronized. "They heard the correction," the voice continued. "That makes them part of the broadcast." My throat tightened. "You're killing them." "No," it replied. "We are reporting accurately." The studio glass reflected my face back at me, pale, sweating, eyes wide. The mic light blinked. "Your participation is increasing engagement," the voice said. "You are improving signal clarity." A new alert appeared. 4:30 a.m. Special broadcast. "Live host required?" I shook my head. "I won't do it." The static softened, almost gentle. "Then we will use the clearest voice available." The studio door behind me clicked. Unlocked. I hadn't touched it. On the monitor, a final line appeared. Caller count. 7 survivors. 0. The phone rang once more. I picked it up without thinking. The line was silent. Then my own voice spoke back to me. "You're already on the air." I didn't remember sitting back down in the chair. One moment I was standing, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my own voice tell me I was already on the air. The next, I was seated in front of the console. The mic was inches from my mouth. The red light was solid now, no blinking, no flicker, live. The monitors no longer showed playlists or logs. They showed text, scrolling, like a teleprompter. Good morning, you are listening. My lips trembled. I'm not saying it, I whispered. The static pulsed, slow and patient. You already are, the voice replied. You're just behind. The station clock changed. Not the time, the format. 00:00:01, 00:00:02. It wasn't tracking hours anymore. It was tracking runtime. The door to the studio creaked open. I turned. The hallway was empty, the lights were off. But I could see the faint glow of monitors further down the hall, flickering on in rooms that should have been dark. Production booths, editing bays, offices that hadn't been used in years, all active, all listening. The teleprompter text updated. Begin segment. I shook my head violently. No. The speakers crackled. A familiar voice filled the room. Not mine, the anchor. The same calm, neutral delivery. Good morning, he said. This is your update. I stared at the monitor. The anchor wasn't in the studio. I was. Emergency services confirm multiple fatalities following overnight incidents, the anchor continued. Authorities are urging residents to remain indoors. The teleprompter scrolled faster now. Breathe. Pause. Continue. I didn't authorize this, I said. You did, the voice replied, when you listened. The anchor paused. That same unnatural silence. Then the sentence resumed. But the voice changed mid-word. It became mine. There is no cause for panic. My throat closed. I hadn't spoken. The waveform showed my voice anyway. Perfect match, pitch, cadence, breathing. I stood up, knocking the chair over. The broadcast didn't stop. The anchor's voice and mine alternated seamlessly. A conversation stitched together from two mouths that weren't moving. This station will remain live throughout the night, he said. This station will remain accurate, it replied. I backed away until I hit the wall. What do you want? I asked. The static softened again. Completion. The monitor switched feeds. Camera footage appeared. Not from the station, from homes, cars, hospitals, people sitting alone, radios glowing softly beside them. Some were crying, some were staring, some were smiling. All listeners who remain, the voice said, have accepted the broadcast. The teleprompter displayed a name. Not mine, someone else's, then another, and another. Each one crossed out as the anchor read them. As I read them, I covered my ears. The sound didn't stop. You can still leave, the voice said. The station no longer requires a physical host. I laughed hysterically. Then why am I still here? A pause, then quietly. Because you hear the corrections clearly. The studio lights dimmed. The camera feed changed. I was on the screen now, from behind, sitting at the desk, hands folded, speaking calmly into the mic. I wasn't sitting. I wasn't speaking. But the broadcast said otherwise. The teleprompter reached the end. One final line appeared. Sign off. The red mic light pulsed. Say it, the voice said gently. No, I whispered. Say it, it repeated, and it will end. I looked at the screen, at myself, at the listeners, at the names, waiting to be read if I refused. My mouth opened, and the words came out, whether I wanted them to or not. This has been your update, my voice said. Thank you for listening. The mic light turned off. The monitors went dark. The station fell silent. I collapsed to the floor, gasping. For a moment, just a moment, I thought it was over. Then my phone vibrated, a notification. 4:59 a.m. Special broadcast now live. I looked up at the clock. 5 a.m. The radio turned itself back on, and this time there was no one in the studio at all. I woke up in my car. The engine was off. Morning light filled the street like nothing had happened. For a moment I thought it was over. Then the radio turned on. Static. A calm voice spoke. Mine. If you're hearing this, it said, the correction is complete. I shut the radio off. This time it stayed silent. I stepped outside. The street looked normal, houses quiet, no sound of static, no voices. My phone worked. Time was correct, messages loaded. I laughed, shaky and exhausted. Maybe it had ended. Maybe it had never really happened. Then a man walked past me, a small radio clipped to his belt. It crackled softly, not loud enough to hear words, just enough to notice. He stopped and looked at me. You heard it too, didn't you? He asked. I didn't answer. The radio went silent again. The man walked on. I stood there for a long time, listening for static that never came. But even now, when everything is quiet, I still don't turn the radio on anymore.